Here we go. All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Shreve Memorial Library Virtual Book Club. Tonight, we are joined by the Books and Brats Book Club from our main branch, and we're going to be talking about all things Dune. So, without further ado, I will turn it over to Jackie, and you can get the conversation started.
Hey, thanks, Samantha.
You're welcome.
Normally I co-host with Chris when we do a book club, but Chris couldn't make it today. So I am leading us on Dune, which is one of my favorite science fiction novels of all time. Though some people would argue it's not a science fiction novel, it's much more. We'll get into that. So Dune is, looking at my notes, Dune was written in 1965 by Frank Herbert. It was published actually as an anthology in a magazine, Analog. And then it was published in book form, like I said, in 66. And it received a Hugo Award and the very first Nebula Award for Best Novel. And to date, it is the best-selling science fiction novel of all time. So Frank Herbert is just a fantastic world builder with this novel. So it's set in the distant future. Okay, so how many of us, Richard, you made it.
I did.
So I've read Dune and a few of the sequels. Has anybody else actually read the books in the series?
No, ma'am.
Okay. All right. So I will do my absolute best not to ruin Dune for you.
I have read Dune and the two of the sequels. I never read Messiah, and I'm a big fan of the movie and the Sci-Fi adaptation movies. And I've played a few of the video games.
Well, you'll be our expert on the video games then.
I've read the synopsis of several of the books, but I haven't actually read the books.
So Dune has been adapted. So Richard kind of mentioned this already, but Dune's been adapted to film in 1984, and it was a who was the director? I think it was David Lynch. Am I right, Richard?
You're right.
David Lynch. Yeah. David Lynch made a film of it, and now there's a new film coming out, and the director's name is...
It looks really good from what I saw.
Denis Villeneuve. I think he's a French filmmaker. And it's starring Timothy, I don't know how to say his name, Chalamet. He was in The King on Netflix, and he was on the new version of Little Woman, if you know that actor.
Okay.
So he plays the title character. Okay, so let's get back to the Duniverse, as Samantha called it earlier. So
when I did my research, I haven't read the books, but I did a lot of research, and I found that the original books has turned into the wonderful thing called the Duniverse. It has video games and board games and all kinds of fun stuff associated with it, and spin-off and all that other stuff.
In this one novel, Frank Herbert is able to build a massive universe, just beautifully. It takes place in the distant future. It's a feudal governing system, and so you have like lords and barons and other feudal titles, and they rule entire planets. Those are their fiefdoms, and there's an emperor. And
just to give a little context, it takes place 10,000 years into the future.
Oh, thank you for that,
wow.
Rich. I had forgotten that. So yeah, way in the future. So yeah, so we're in a feudal universe. Everybody else is a little peon, and you're loyal to your various houses. But we're looking at one particular house, and that's House Atreides. And they have, so prior to the start of the novel, they have been granted stewardship over a planet called Arrakis, but everyone knows it as Dune, and it is a sand planet. It's covered in sand, it's a wasteland, but it's valuable because it's the only place in the universe that the melange or spice is produced. Is everyone following me still? So you have this spice, and it is the most important commodity in the universe. It expands your mind to supernatural levels, or can, and it extends life, and you have to use it. Those supernatural abilities, or practically supernatural abilities, allow for space travel. You can't travel in space without the use of the spice. The emperor is, I think, 200 or 300 years old because of the spice. So it is the most valuable resource in the universe, and it's only found on this one planet covered in sand, and it has a local population called the Fremen.
Well, I think you should introduce some of the other factions and what their key roles in this universe are, just to build a little bit of the universe for the people that aren't too familiar with it.
Okay. So like I said, we have House Atreides, and our main character, Paul Atreides, is the son of Duke Leto Atreides. So those are our heroes in the story. Our primary villain is House Harkonnen. You have Baron Harkonnen, and he's a bitter rival to Duke Leto. So their House Atreides and House Harkonnen are bitter enemies. And I'm trying to remember the Emperor's name. Do you remember?
No, not offhand.
Okay, and there's the Emperor, and then the Emperor. Well, yeah, I don't want to give too much away, so I'll skip that and say that you also have another group of people called the Bene Gesserit, and they're like a religious order of women, and they are intent on breeding over many generations the Quinsac Haderach, which is like a superhuman. So that's kind of like a side story that becomes
selective breeding of like the noble houses.
Yeah. So now I'm getting too much into the plot, though. What really sells Dune?
I'm sorry.
Well, what? Okay. I was gonna say.
Well, I was just gonna say.
Okay, go ahead. Jump right in.
Sorry, no. I was just gonna say, like, just to build a little bit of the world, so to like get people interested. Like, there are another group of people called the Mentats, and he doesn't go too deep into all these factions. He kind of gives you a nice little gloss over of what they are and why they are, and then he like builds them further on into the story. So it's not like a huge information dump, like right at the very beginning of like, oh, you need to read this novel before you can enjoy the story, like the Mentats are like supercomputers. They're in the place of supercomputers. They're people that train their mind, and they use the spice because we got too reliant on computers, and the computers took over. So you've got these people that are basically, there's one per house. Like everybody has a Mentat just to calculate stuff for them. And then the Bene Gesserits are breeding. They're like a religious order, and then you have the houses, and there's more, but that's pretty much everybody you need to know, I guess. Oh, and the navigators, the people that do space travel.
So what I think the most important things are to take away from getting introduced to Dune is that it's about politics. So this whole universe builds its own political structure. It's about religion. because there's a lot of religion that you get into, like religious stuff that happens in the story. And it's definitely also about like human emotion. Like it's a very dramatic story. And all these relationships are really just well developed. And there's a lot of influences to Dune. So Frank Herbert was living in Oregon when he first started writing this novel. And I did not know this, but Oregon has sand dunes. So there's these sand dunes in Northern Oregon, and they were in the middle of this whole ecological restoration thing that they were trying to do. And so they were like planting certain kinds of grasses in the sand dunes to kind of try and stop the sand dunes from like spilling over into other areas, like wooded areas. So that's the other thing that Dune is about. It's about ecology. And what's really interesting is that it came out just a few years after, are you guys familiar with Rachel Carlson's Silent Spring?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not.
So,
No, ma'am.
So Rachel Carlson is a scientist, and she writes a book called Silent Spring, and she's basically talking about and teaches people about in 1962 about the dangers of chemicals in the environment. And that was something that was a brand new concept for the average person. Up until then, people thought chemicals, great, pour it on everything. And she said, well, no, there's potentially harmful effects that we need to consider. So this came out just a few years after that. It took him multiple years to write this book. So some people say that he was definitely influenced by her book. And another film that came out in '63 was Lawrence of Arabia. And if you guys are familiar with Lawrence of Arabia, it's about a foreigner going to a desert place and becoming basically the leader of a great army. And that's the gist of the story of Dune as well, which is that the main character goes to the Dune planet and he winds up becoming a great leader. So a lot of people have also like drawn parallels to those things as influences of Herbert building this wonderful expansive world. Another thing that's so interesting about Dune is that his intentional distancing from technology in the way that he tells the story. Technology plays such a minor role. And he establishes that early on in the story, which is that basically smart computers are prohibited based on something that happened thousands of years ago. So everything has to be done organically. So like Richard was saying, you have people who were bred to be human supercomputers. So you have the mentats. That's an order. But they're also like bred. You know, they're not just, it's not like you just join up and become a mentat. You do it because of multiple generations of being a mentat. And so you've got this brain that is tremendously powerful. And so you're able to do like these complex computations and serve the different factions because they're not allowed to have like a sit down and type it out computer. It's interesting. It's very interesting. There's so many things to pick apart about Dune.
And I think that before you go on, I just think it's really interesting that this book was written in 1965 or so, and we're talking about supercomputers and how technology is bad, and like now we're all about the smartphones and the supercomputers, and we're using technology right now to have this book discussion. So it's just interesting how even back then it was like all this doom around technology, and then we'll go back to being organic in thousands of years from now, you know.
Yeah. I don't know.
That was a point that I was also going to make, and
yeah.
I just thought that he was such a forward thinker, and you know, there's that, and then there's later on in the books what happens to certain places that, you know, like natural resources get used up, and you it's just like he was really like had his finger on the pulse of like what could go wrong if we keep acting like this.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, like fear of the machine like is very much real in the story. And what's funny is it's like a plot element that doesn't really like manifest other than that it informs the way that everyone lives, but it's not like they walk around saying we better not go build more computers.
Right.
But what else is there to say? Oh, it's also been comparisons have been drawn between it and like Beowulf or the Legend of King Arthur. But basically, it's just this epic hero story that is so well liked because it's so much like ancient mythology. So it's like a modern myth. In fact, if you've ever been into that there's a rare books or reading room at the Norton Art Gallery. Have you ever been in there? In that room?
Have.
They have art panels, a mural around the ceiling in the room, and and it's like different scenes from different famous novels. But one of the panels is Dune, and there's a big scene from Dune in there, and it really like, yeah. So I walked around the room saying, "Oh, well, that's that book, and that's that classic 19th century novel," and that's like, "Oh, and there's Dune." But it is very appropriate because I think it's one of those books that's going to be enduring. That it's already stood the test of time. I mean, the book's 50, 60 years old, and it's still read and it still reads as very fresh. Like it doesn't feel at all dated. You don't feel like, oh yeah, the 1950s saucer spaceships. Yeah, it feels real dated. But this is fresh every time. And if you haven't seen the 84 film, I personally love it. Some people don't like it, but I think it's a really great adaptation. It really has a really great style to it. And I'm excited to see the new film, to see how they took the novel and whether or not they're going to let Lynch's version of the film inform inform it in any way. Because I can tell you this, that like with the video games and other media, you can see David Lynch all over it. Like the way things look is very much pulled out of that movie. Wouldn't you say so, Rich?
Yeah, the video games were, and there's something about the video games that I thought was interesting. Like, they just crop up. Like, there hasn't been new Dune. Like, whenever the game came out in the late 90s, there hadn't been any new Dune material. They were just like, oh, this is a franchise that's been kind of quiet for a while. Let's bring this back. And the game, a few of the games, some of that I played, were wildly successful, and it kind of drove people back to the series. So it's one of those really, really enduring series that people really enjoy.
And there was an attempt to adapt it to film in the 1970s by Alejandro Jodorowsky. He made Holy Mountain. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that film. It would have been very interesting to see his film. It never got produced. He, for instance, cast Dali, the artist Dali, as the emperor. And there's a documentary about it. I'm trying to remember. I think it's just called Jodorowsky's Dune. But he spent years developing his film adaptation, and it just never happened. And then just 10 years later, we have David Lynch's version. But it's worth reading about. If you kind of get into Dune, it's worth learning about this other never made version of it, because it would have been pretty trippy, I think. Because if you've seen Holy Mountain, it's a movie that leaves you head scratching.
I've seen quite a few of those movies in my day.
What else is there to say without giving too much away? Rich.
Well, I mean, the book was written in '66. I mean, I think spoiler warnings are a bit late. I feel like, well, I guess because you're trying to get people to read the book, but I mean, just the amount of if you enjoy like science fiction or fantasy that has very, very deep world building, then like Dune is for you, because he, like a lot of people like Tolkien because the world is so rich and deep and there's history. Frank Herbert did a fantastic job building building the world that Dune takes place in, and he actually had more to publish whenever he passed away. Like this was like his whole life, it seems like, and his kids actually picked up some of the pieces and finished some of his work after he had passed away.
Yeah, Brian Herbert started releasing Dune novels in '99. So let's talk about the other books, actually. Let me.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because when I was doing research, there's like, what are there, like 6 original in the original Dune set, and then they do all the spin-offs.
Yeah,
I
so
think there's 4 there's actually written by Frank Herbert, and the other 2 were finished by his son.
So there's
There's
Dune, and then there's Dune Messiah, and then Children of Dune,
Mhm.
and then there's God Emperor of Dune, and that's all the ones that I've read. Because God Emperor of Dune blew my mind so much that I said I can't go down this rabbit hole any further.
Oh, you stopped.
I had to. It was maybe I can take it back on. So Dune and Dune Messiah and Children of Dune deal with the main character that I talked about, Paul Atreides, and his children.
Mhm.
Okay. God Emperor of Dune takes place like 800 years later or something like that.
Oh, okay.
I think it's 3,000 years later,
Or
actually.
is it 300? Okay, hold on. I will find out right now how far out it goes. This is why it started hurting my head. It's 3,500 years later.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was way off. It's 3,500 years later. So then it's like, then 3,500 years later, these things happen. And then it's like, and then I was like, oh my goodness, there's 2 more books after this. I can't even. So, but it was good. I won't say it was a bad book, but I was starting to feel like it was like a little bit too much for me to handle narrative wise. But there's Dune, Dune Messiah, Children of Dune. And a lot of people read those together because, like I said, they're like one continuous, like clear story. And you can buy them like as a single volume, all those 3 books together. You can buy them like a little 3-book set. So I feel like other people feel the same way I do about the series. And then you have this big jump with God Emperor of Dune and Heretics of Dune. And then his last novel that he produced was Chapter House Dune. Maybe this is going to be maybe this is going to be my motivation to read Heretics of Dune and Chapter House Dune.
Okay.
And then there's a ton of them after that with Brian Herbert and his co-author Kevin Anderson. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 Dune novels, all built in the Dune universe. Some of them are prequels. And then some of them are about different specific events that happened after the main story of the first 3 novels.
I was going to ask, are there any stories in between that 3,500 year jump? Kind of fill in the gaps.
Kind of fill in the 3,500 years.
Yeah.
Well, the reason why he like takes that big jump is because like nothing really, like basically there's peace, and then you find out why there was peace and why it had such a long stretch like that. I didn't read past God Emperor Dune either. I was like,
No, see, you felt the same way I did.
yeah, I was like, oh, it's a big departure because you expect, you read 3 linear books, and then like the fourth one is just like like everyone was saying, oh, 3,500 years later, all this is happening. But at the very end, it explains kind of why that happened.
Okay.
Yeah, it's good. I would definitely recommend. When I read Dune, I thought this is gonna be my favorite book ever. But then I decided to read Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, and I was like, I think Dune Messiah is better than Dune. And then I read Children of Dune. I think Children of Dune is better than Dune Messiah and Dune. So like they really build on each other. Like Dune becomes like this foundation to this universe.
Mhm.
That really, and I don't want to discount the other novels in the series, but really just read the first 3. No.
And then if you
Well,
feel
the
like
first-
taking a trip,
And
read
then
the
if you
next
feel
3.
like, yeah, if you feel
Well,
like taking a trip.
The second and third one, like I said before, like really satisfying because they're a direct continuation of the story. It's like, oh, and then 5 years later, this is what's going on. You're like, oh, great. I want to know what happened to all these people. And then the third one is pretty much the same thing.
Oh, and that's a thing to know about Dune. Like I only mentioned, I think, 3 characters by name. There are a lot of characters. And I don't want to go into all of it because I think, you know what, just check out the new movie. It's gonna be, when is it coming out? Rich, do you know when the new Dune is coming out?
I
I'm
do
gonna
not.
find out real quick. October. It's coming out. Okay, so we got a little ways to go.
We
But
have lots of time to read before October.
yeah, you've got time. You've got time to watch the David Lynch version. Oh, forgot to say, Sci-Fi Channel did a Dune miniseries back in the early
Remember
2000s.
that. I remember that.
And Hoopla doesn't have the Dune. They did 2 miniseries. They did a Dune miniseries and a Children of Dune miniseries. And the Children of Dune miniseries is actually Dune Messiah and Children of Dune adapted together.
Okay.
So the Children of Dune miniseries is available to stream on Hoopla for free.
Woohoo! Yay,
I know.
Hoopla.
So you can go into Hoopla and watch it. My feeling though was, if you're gonna have Children of Dune, why don't you have Dune?
Yeah. Questions that need answers.
But that's something you could go do right now. Like as soon as we get off, just start watching Children of Dune. But don't unless you read Dune first.
Okay.
Yeah.
So read Dune first. Check it out
Read
from the
Dune.
library.
Yes.
And then watch the Children of Dune.
Yes.
And Hoopla does have the graphic novel version of Dune.
Yes, I almost forgot to say that.
awesome.
Hoopla has a graphic novel version, which I have not read yet.
You know, the art is really beautiful. They did a really good job of it with it.
Really, I feel like I need to check it out.
Yeah.
Have you read it at all?
I did not finish it. So before we hit record, I said that I tried a couple of times and really struggled to get through with Dune. So I tried.
Did you try the graphic novel and the novel?
And the movie.
And the movie. Oh,
Yeah.
And yet you still came to the book club meeting to figure out what is wrong with these people.
Yeah. Well, you know, I wanted to hear, like, if other people get me excited about it, then I'll go back to it.
Okay. Do you feel like we've done all this rambling? Has it ended?
I think so. So I didn't realize that the movie was by David Lynch, and so I got like 15 minutes into it and was like, why is this so weird? And then I looked it up. I was like, oh, that's why. All right.
It's definitely a unique style of filmmaking.
Yeah.
I
And
can tell you that it took me a while to get used to the voiceovers. Like I really didn't like the voiceovers because in the books the characters have lots of inner monologues. You're getting into the headspace of these characters, and David Lynch's way of, providing that exposition is to literally have the characters lurking around and like having like their disembodied voices, like, you know,
Narrating
you're
what's
hearing their
happening.
thoughts. So you're hearing
Yeah.
their thoughts. It's a very, you know, you don't see that a lot in films. Usually they kind of like introduce like another character for the character to talk to and say, these are my thoughts, you know.
Jackie, I like that. Do that again.
But this is my other character. These are my thoughts.
Yes, I love that.
Well, that's what they do in movies, right? You have to have a way for a person to explain things, express things.
Right.
Yeah, they usually have an inexperienced person with the situation go, why is that there? And the person has to go, well.
Yeah, as I'm
Well,
sure you're.
Harry, I'm Hermione Granger, and I know everything, basically.
Or they had to explain their whole reason for, you know, the whole thought behind the bad guy doing whatever it was that they had to do. Here's my whole master plan. I'm going to spend 10 minutes telling you why this is happening to you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, that's kind of annoying too. But so David Lynch's film is a little quirky, and it's a long movie. I feel like it's like 2.5 hours long.
Okay.
But Dune is a big story, so it's kind of hard to tell it quickly and do the story justice. So I'm curious to see how this new film is. I don't know if it tells you how long it's going to be. Let's see.
Who's the director of the new film?
All I can see is their budget, $165 million. Well, they better have some good sandworms then.
Well, that's a pretty big budget, I guess.
Yeah, the sandworms are really cool. Just think of a worm laying on its belly, and it's still like, what, like 100 feet in the air?
Oh,
Like
just
laying down.
gigantic. So yeah, the Dune planet is inhospitable. It has no water, or virtually no water. It has a native population called the Fremen, who are hostile to foreigners. And while you try to harvest the sand, the spice, which you can find in patches on top of the sand or in the sand, you have these massive worms that are the size of skyscrapers, just sensitive sensitive to any tremors. So it's like the movie Tremors. Yeah, except it's probably where the movie Tremors got its idea from. Yeah, but these things are huge, like skyscraper size, and they just pop up out of the sand and you're dust. You're done. And it's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
It's also, first place I ever saw sandworms was the movie Beetlejuice.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, it's a total ripoff of Dune, or homage to Dune.
Maybe, yeah.
Because they're literally worms out in the desert, just eating you.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I'm excited because Timothée Chalamet, he's a young actor and he's only been in a few films. I hope I'm saying his name right, but he seems to be such a great actor, and I think he's really done well in the few dramatic roles that I've seen him in. So this Paul Atreides character is he's a messiah character in the story. He starts off as maybe like a late teen, early 20s, lord of the house, in training, to his father, and then he winds up becoming his own person and far exceeds his father's grandeur. He's just this monolithic character, this Lawrence of Arabia, Messiah in the desert character. And he struggles with that a lot in the story, which is great. Like, it's not like he's just like totally believing his own grandeur. You know what I mean? Like, he's not like a cult leader who believes completely in his own stuff. He has a lot of self-doubt in the story. So he's a really complex character.
When I was researching about it, there were some places that drew kind of comparisons to Islam and Muhammad's plight, and kind of said that the story kind of parallels that. I didn't know if you saw any of those references when you read it, or
he takes a lot from, even the name of the planet Arrakis, he named it after Iraq, of course, this was before, Desert Storm or any kind of major, negative feelings towards
Right.
the Middle East that a lot of people have today. But, he named Arrakis after Iraq, and it's definite, a lot of the names are definitely based in the Arabic language.
Yeah.
Some of the names for things like, I can't think of any, like Kwisatz Haderach.
Yeah, I think he also drew from other languages, but he did draw heavily from Arabic.
Yeah.
So that's a good point. I never really thought about it in those terms, but yes, you have this character who leads a people, and he goes, and these people become his followers, and I mentioned earlier, it's also religious, and I keep using the word Messiah and not like general or leader, because he is a religious figure.
Right.
He is not only their leader.
He's prophesied to appear, and then he does.
And then he does. And he leads them on, they literally use the word jihad. He leads them on holy war.
Yeah, that's the word that was one of the examples I was looking for. They actually literally say jihad.
Yeah, he literally leads them on a jihad. So yes, Frank Herbert definitely drew a lot from that historical narrative. I guess I never really thought about it in those terms, but once you say it, it makes sense that he's drawn a lot of inspiration. It's funny how our greatest stories always have origins in other great stories.
Yeah.
Well, I like a lot of the deeper themes that are symbolized in just the first book, Dune, like abuse of technology. He kind of touches on that, and then a native population being abused, and then finding a messiah. There's definite, to me, it feels like there's definite like Native American kind of themes, and the fact that the Fremen don't want these people messing up their planet. And
that's the ecology part of the story.
That's the ecology part, resources don't last forever. Like, quit messing up our stuff,
Yeah.
Like, you're using up everything. Stop it. And I just really enjoy those deeper themes. I mean, those themes are things that don't go away in a generation. They're, multi-generational problems, or not problems, but issues, and they're still applicable today. And some things more than others, like the technology deal, is even more applicable today than it was 3-4 decades ago.
I just realized Dune is Fern Gully. Dune is
You mean Fern Gully is Dune?
Fern Gully?
Oh, Fern Gully is the same story. Remember? Except you got
really. Now, see, I saw Fern Gully.
They're 2 inches tall, Jackie.
Okay, I'll find a different one. Avatar is Dune.
Avatar is Fern Gully. I don't care what you say.
But
I watched Avatar and I was like, Fern Gully.
Except instead of getting small, he got tall.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's a story that we like to tell ourselves. The story of a stranger coming and becoming the leader of a nation or a world, in this case. So.
And then jihading everything.
Take it all down.
But even with all the war and everything, it ends up being, well, I actually haven't read the last 2 books, so I don't know how it ends. But the end of God Emperor ends up being a peaceful kind of thing.
Does it?
Does it?
Well, no, not the end, but
okay.
There was peace for 3,500 years. I think that's pretty darn good. They did call him a tyrant, though, and they said he ruled with an iron fist. So I'm sure there were some places that were fine. There were some oases of peace.
So you know that HBO is going to have a Dune series. Are you guys aware of that?
No.
No, I didn't know that.
They're having a series after the movie comes out, or is it
It's going to be called Dune: The Sisterhood, and presumably it's going to be about the Bene Gesserits. Like I told you, that's the women religious order, very political organization. So it lends itself to a lot of First of all, let's talk about gender in Dune. They have a lot of strong female characters in Dune. The males are the main story, but the Bene Gesserits alone just make the story because they are sneaky,
I don't think
smart, political.
I don't think you ever lined out that Bene Gesserits are only women.
Oh, I thought I had said that initially. Okay, I'll establish this now. The Bene Gesserits are a female religious order.
Okay.
Yeah. Are they religious? I guess they are religious, right, Richard?
In a way, yeah.
They have their own belief system.
They have their own doctrine.
Yeah.
They have a goal for sure.
Yeah, they have their own beliefs. So maybe not religion, but philosophy.
It definitely feels religious though. Like
yeah.
They don't talk about anything really religious, but they definitely act like a religious sect. Like, and they all dress the same, and feels like they're all nuns.
Yeah, they're like nuns with guns. Actually, not guns, knives.
Space guns.
Space guns.
Yeah.
No, and that's one thing that's great. There's lots of knife fights. That's what I like about Dune. They don't hardly ever use guns. It's always like a knife.
Yeah, I'm watching I'm watching in the background the trailer for the new movie to see if they have any big mega sandworms, and they were just showing them practicing with like a knife fight.
With a knife fight, yeah. That's one thing that's great. Again, like Frank Herbert is just so thoughtful about like removing technology from everyday interactions, like.
And the knife fights are like the common duel amongst the noble class. It's like, oh, challenge me to a knife fight, do you?
Yeah, they're like, oh, Tuesday night knife fight.
Let me use my family knife.
But these knives in this adaptation are a little bit fancier than our regular knives.
They're sci-fi knives.
They're sci-fi knives. They have lights, like lightsabers and stuff.
Yeah, they're fancy. So I'm excited to see. So first of all, Dune is going to premiere when it does finally come out, both in the theater and on HBO Max. Mm-hmm. And then the Dune Sisterhood is going to come at some point to HBO Max, which who knows with COVID how it's interrupted production on so many different things. So who knows when we'll actually get it. But I'm excited for the Duniverse to make its way to a series. And I'm hoping that the Dune film does well enough that they do Messiah and Children of Dune and stop there.
And stop there.
And stop there. And not take us down the road of God Emperor of Dune.
We're really trashing God Emperor too.
I just can't handle it.
I thought this was to get people to read books.
Well, don't you want to know what happens in the next two books? Don't you kind of want to know what happens?
If the next book after that says, and then 10,000 years later.
Well, I don't know about that, but I think I'll start with
Dune.
I'll start with Dune.
Yes.
And then I might start with, if I can find this Dune series, Not Children of Dune, but the first one.
The first sci-fi miniseries.
First
I really
sci-fi
enjoyed them
miniseries.
when they came out years ago.
The audiobooks are excellent too.
Oh, that's an option too. The audio. Kirk, did you try the audiobook?
I did. It's like a whole cast.
Oh.
It's very well produced. But it's the kind of thing where like I was trying to do something else while listening to it, and
you got
suddenly,
lost.
yeah, there were whole houses of generals that I missed.
So is there like a chart in the first book that tells you all the houses and the people? Or is that just something you just have to remember?
There's plenty fan generated material.
Yeah, I'm like, I need a cheat sheet.
Yeah.
Really, there's really only three things three royal houses to remember: the Atreides, the Harkonnens, and the Emperor, whose name I forget. So those are the three royal, or whatever you call them, nobilities. Those are the three nobilities to know. And then beyond that, you need to know the Fremen and the Bene Gesserits as two different groups of people. And then the fact that Mentats are supercomputer people. And
that's really
anything? Huh?
That's really it to get into the first book, I think.
Yeah,
that's a lot of
much
information. That's a lot of information to have. Like you have to like. I watched the movie first. Obviously, I was a kid. Whenever it came out, when did it come out? I was a little kid when it came out. I enjoyed it.
Came out in '84. Yeah. You probably didn't see it in '84. You probably saw it.
I went to the movie theater when I was 2, and I watched it, and I loved it now.
Hey, you could have.
But I watched it as a teenager after I got interested in sci-fi, and at first, it's a little unwieldy on the first watch, but it's one of those that you watch it again, and once you have an understanding of the universe, you're like, well, this is a little bit more enjoyable now that I'm not always confused.
Yeah.
Kirk, I have to ask you, since you have had so much trouble getting into Dune, did you try to read The Dreamers?
The Dreamers? That was the last one.
Our last
the last book club, right? I did not.
You did not. I was hoping to hear what you thought of The Dreamers.
That was, that sounds like it was definitely up my alley. I remember the conversation from last time.
What's The Dreamers?
Oh, Rich, you got to watch our last
one.
You got to watch our last one, but basically it's about a pandemic, and it was written before the pandemic, but it came out just this last year.
I'm a little offended, and I'll tell you why. You only invite me to the book discussions about super nerdy topics.
You are invited to all of our book discussions, Rich.
Okay, so I do have to admit I failed to inform you about The Dreamers. And here's why, Rich. I wasn't originally the person who was going to host it. Somebody else was hosting it, and I was just going to be a participant, though I still could have invited you. And then I wound up being the one to host it. So I guess
I forgive you.
You forgive me?
I'd like to hear more about The Dreamers.
Well, I don't know.
Dreamers sounded awesome. I haven't read it yet, but it's still on my to-be-read list. I'm trying to finish. I'm proud of myself because I'm reading more books now than I was this time last year, so I'm very proud of myself. But The Dreamers is still on the list.
So
but I will read it.
Very briefly, The Dreamers is about a remote college town in Northern California where a sleeping sickness takes over, and you fall asleep and you don't wake up. And you would think, well, that's not so bad, but Rich, you fall asleep while driving your car or in the bathtub or, walking down the street, walking your dog. And so people get killed or die, or if nobody knows you're asleep in your bed and you don't wake up, you just die of dehydration. So it's
you're
pretty.
On stilts?
Huh?
Then you fall off.
then you fall off the stilts, Rich. It's a good story. It starts the outbreak. I guess I don't want to call it a pandemic. It's more of an outbreak because the story it's contained to the town. And the town becomes quarantined, and then it's just like everything kind of just falls apart because people are just falling out left and right.
You know what that reminds me of?
What's that?
A supposed real story of the dancing sickness that happened in Europe in that one town. Did you ever hear about that?
Yes.
People actually died from that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, what is that about?
Not a seizure, like literally got up and started dancing.
Like,
Didn't it have something like with ergot poisoning or something? Like what it like in the rye and the bread, and like they would just dance until they passed out. Wasn't that like part of that? I feel like
Let's hope.
I don't know, but it sounds.
Yeah.
I know that's why they think the Salem witch trials happened.
Mm-hmm.
That people were hallucinating and from poison grain, and they were accusing their neighbors of witchcraft.
Mm-hmm.
That was a nice tangent.
I have to show y'all this. My child is sending me all of these gifts because I won't respond to her.
I am so excited. My daughter is 9 months old, and I cannot wait for the day that I go to use the bathroom and I open up the door and she is just on the bathroom door like this.
Waiting on you, mommy. You can't wait for that now. But when it happens, you'll be like, I just go to the bathroom.
I just want to use the restroom.
Just one minute.
So in conclusion, Dune is fantastic. Dune is expansive. It's gonna be, it really does require your attention, Kurt. You gotta actually, like, it's not
Kurt. What's wrong with you?
Yeah, Kirk. You have to pay attention to Dune, okay?
It does require your full attention because it is an immersive story. And you were talking about being younger and probably having liked it. I read it when I was a teen, so that probably has a lot to do with why it resonated so much with me at the time, because it's just so massive a story and so cool. It's just so cool.
You're the actual one that introduced it to me.
Yeah, I remember. I said, read Dune.
I said, all
like
right.
that.
And then he said, all right.
Read Dune, okay.
Well, I feel, my job requires me to drive a lot. So I get to enjoy a lot of audiobooks because, it's very easy to listen to an audiobook and not zone out, but, it takes very little attention to keep yourself in the middle of the road. And I find that that's the best way that I can enjoy an audiobook, because I can't enjoy an audiobook if I'm trying to do something, especially when I haven't heard already. So if you have a long drive coming up, I suggest enjoying a nice audiobook, maybe even Dune.
I have to say, I love an audiobook on a long drive, and it distracts my husband, and he can't stand it. He says he likes it, but he always says, wait, stop. I didn't understand anything that was going on. Go back 3 chapters.
Oh, not 3 chapters. Now, I will do that. I will listen to like my podcasts, which are like audiobooks because they're telling stories or whatever. But I'll zone out. I'll be like, oh, wait, what did they just say? And I'll have to back it up. I'm like, go back.
Yeah.
Let me catch that.
I'll be like, I wonder what I'm going to eat for dinner tonight. Wait, what happened? No.
Yeah.
Wait, everyone was murdered?
Yeah.
Like, wait, what?
How did this happen?
When did they get here? Like, when did that happen?
So I want to talk about our next book because I had a thought, and I know every time I'm involved in it, we wind up reading something science fiction.
Oh, we like science fiction.
I know. This should just be a science fiction book club.
We had the first discussion, and the 3 of us were in the first discussion about The Expanse, but I don't know what type of things that Kirk likes. I don't know if you guys talked about during the sleepers one.
The Dreamers.
Kirk, is there something you would like to read, or Christy?
Or I'm just like, what type of genre of stuff do you
genre.
like to?
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm kind of all over the place. I like some sci-fi. I like some speculative fiction. Like right now, I'm in the middle of a novel that I had stopped to try to read Dune, and that's part of the problem why I wasn't able to finish it, because I want to keep on going back to this.
You have to finish one first.
Yeah, it's called Disappear Doppelganger Disappear, and it's kind of Murakami-esque. There's this guy who finds out that he has a doppelganger who has disappeared, and he thinks that he's disappearing, and wild misadventures happen after that.
Interesting.
Oh, that does sound interesting. Well, now I feel like I should read that. What's it called again?
Disappear Doppelganger Disappear. It's by Matthew Salisis.
Nice. I was going to recommend for our next read Ender's Game, because that's one of my favorites of all time.
I haven't read Ender's Game.
I also haven't read Ender's Game, so.
Oh, so good. Rich, have you read Ender's Game?
I've read all of them until.
You've probably read further into the series than I have.
Did you get to the one with the Picaninos?
Yes.
Okay, I read to that one. I don't want to say the other big plot point in it. That kind of.
So, what do you guys think about Ender's Game?
That's the third one, or the second one? I think that's the third one. That's the third one. I read the 3.
You read the first 3?
Yeah.
What do you guys think about Ender's Game? I mean, you guys probably don't know much about
Military science fiction novel.
A lot of people consider it a YA novel.
And insectoid alien species, the buggers. Okay. I'll check it out. I'm reading.
Not very good.
I'm reading the description, but I'll check it out. Why not? Ender's Game.
One thing
It's got a lot to do with psychology and the psychological effects of certain things.
Okay.
Don't ruin it, Richard. Save it for the next discussion.
Well, I mean, I like to hear that because I like psychological thrillers. So maybe.
Also, there's a movie.
Not really.
There is a film.
Relatively.
Yeah, it came out in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
There is a film version. I would recommend reading the book first. That's always my recommendation. It's been adapted many times to, I think there's a graphic novel version. And so anyway, there's kind of a Ender's Game universe as well. Because it's been out for, I think it was first published in the 1980s.
Okay.
It's a science fiction classic. And maybe we can draw Chris back to the fold by doing Ender's Game, because I'm sure it's a book that he's read and that he would enjoy discussing.
Well, and I say let's go for Ender's Game.
Ender's Game. So do we want to shoot for February, or do we want to push it to March since it's already the end of January?
We do have another book club meeting February 9th with the Red River Readers Book Club, and they're reading the Book of Lost Names by Kristen Harmel. If we want to do the end of February or beginning of March, either one of those is fine. You just let me know what you think.
Richard, what do you think?
March?
July.
July? We'll have plenty of time to read Dune and Dreamers and Ender's Game by then.
You all have
how about we shoot for March, maybe the 2nd or 3rd week in March?
That sounds good.
Okay.
That sounds good.
All right.
All right, Kristen. And
All right,
Kristen,
y'all.
being with us today too.
Oh yeah, we didn't hear from Kristen.
No problem.
He's been listening.
All right, y'all. Thank you. It is 7:00. I'm gonna go see
right.
my baby.
Yes, go see your baby. Everybody have a good night. Thank y'all for being here.
Good night.